All right, some technical difficulties before, but we are ready to start. So please pretend that nothing happened before and give a warm welcome to Ms. Petra Lundström, the Executive Vice President of Nuclear Generation and Fortum.
Thank you very much. Okay, now we start for real. And first, after this very inspirational moment, I'm super happy to start this panel where we will discuss the prospects and challenges of the SMR and AMR technologies. And now we have a very distinguished panel lined up here, and now I will invite all our panelists to the stage. First, Mr. Jan Panek, Deputy Director General for Nuclear Energy Safety and ITER at the European Commission. So please have your seat over there. Sylvie Cadet-Mercier, Commissioner of the French Nuclear Safety Authority, ASN. Dr. Catherine Huff, Assistant Secretary, Office of Nuclear Energy at U.S. Department of Energy, DOE. Welcome. Then let's see, do we have Mr. Charles Begbede here? Yes. CEO of Audacia and co-founder of Exergon, a venture capital company. Welcome. Peter Klaas, President of International Federation of Industrial Energy Consumers, Europe. And then, can't be a panel without the fuel cycle. Welcome to Cecile Evans, Marketing and Strategic Development Director for Used Fuel Management, D&D, and Waste Management Activities of Orano. And last but not least, Mr. John Gorman, CEO and President of Canadian Nuclear Association. Welcome. And actually, just to a couple of introductory remarks on my part. And as said, I'm Petra Lundström and responsible for nuclear generation at Fortum in Finland. Now we will have a very firm focus on the future also in this panel. So we will really focus on how to enable basically deployment and development of SMRs and advanced reactors. And we will have interesting, very different perspectives from the European Commission, US DOE, as we said. And then we will take a thorough look at the quickly moving Canada as a case country. And then what is very obvious is that the safety authorities will have a very unique role in this process going forward to make SMRs and AMRs reality. So here we have also the representation from the safety authorities and the French ASN. And then, as said, of course, growth of nuclear overall, be that conventional reactors or SMRs or AMRs, will require a very robust fuel supply. We will discuss that more thoroughly. And then I think a very valuable perspective is also that as an industry, we usually think we are very conservative, we are, and stable, and so on. But is there room for innovativity? So we will also have basically a perspective from the private capital. How is that taking in private capital? How is that boosting the development? And then also maybe new industrial consumer perspectives. We have that in our panel. And also the intention is to take questions from the audience midway and towards the end. Let's see, let's try to make time for that. And now we will run it in the way that each one of the panelists will have a short introductory kind of remarks or a presentation responding to a fundamentally important question. Then we will discuss on that topic as a panel for a while, and then after that take the next panelist. So now I'd actually, like to start with Mr. Panek with the question that what is the European Commission's view on SMR's role in the future decarbonization of efforts, and what kind of collaboration efforts will be needed to speed up the development? So for your introductory 3 minutes, please, Mr. Panek.
Thank you, Petra. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here and discuss SMRs. I remember that we had a fantastic discussion on SMRs 2 years ago at WNE, and it's quite good to come back. I think some of the panelists were there also 2 years ago, and it's good to come back and actually take stock of what has happened, because a lot has happened in the last 2 years. And it's also good for me to be, for once, speaking in the beginning of the panel and not at the end, because very often I end up to be the last speaker and then everybody already has said everything that is important. So in solidarity to my successors, I will say very few things so that I leave something for them. 3 messages. First of all, I think the moderator very clearly put SMRs in the context of decarbonization efforts, and indeed that's how we should see them. For us, SMRs are very closely linked to the Paris Agreement and to our commitment for carbon neutrality by 2050, but also the commitments for 2030, known as Fit for 55 or 55% reduction of emissions by 2030. Why is that important? Because SMRs, we see them as a technology that is actually providing new decarbonization options. It's an opportunity for the nuclear sector to step out of the traditional frame of simply technology for power generation and actually go into new applications. And I know that some of the panelists here today are best placed to actually speak about that, so I will not go into further details. Second message, SMRs clearly can fulfill their promise if they are operating or if they are deployed in an environment which fulfills certain preconditions for their success. One of them is that we need to be able to see SMRs deployed on the basis of technology production done in series and recognizing the uniqueness of the SMR concept, and therefore there is a need for an integrated supply chain in Europe that will be able to produce these technologies. Supply chain that integrates different players, different types of companies, large, small, across the full geography of Europe, but also that covers the full value chain of nuclear technology. It is clear that with SMRs we will need a supply chain that will also be able to address the front end, the fuel cycle, but also the back end, new solutions for handling waste, spent fuel, and ultimately decommissioning. If SMRs do not have industrialized responses to all these aspects, they will not be successful. And therefore, the deployment of SMRs has to be primarily driven by the industry. It has to be an industry-driven process, which brings me to my very last point. The third point is that the Commission has made a very clear statement on the support of the SMR initiative. My commissioner earlier this month spoke about her resolve to go forward with the establishment of the SMR partnership in the form of an industrial alliance. And that's important. That exactly illustrates to what I was saying, that the deployment has to be an industry-driven process. The industrial alliance cannot be just a continuation, business as usual, of the preparatory stages of the last year and a half or two, where a lot has been done in the so-called pre-partnership stage. Some colleagues from the panel were actually involved in steering that forward. But it focused on some key issues like defining the business case, defining the regulatory aspects, but it did not go into the full spectrum of issues that need to be covered for SMRs to be successfully deployed. And therefore, the Industrial Alliance will also have to look at these new topics: handling of waste, public acceptance, the skills and competencies that need to be available in Europe for the deployment of SMRs. And we are very much looking forward in the Commission to working with stakeholders precisely on making Industrial Alliance successful also on these subjects. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palek. Any immediate reactions now to the perspective now coming from the Commission? If not, yes, please, Mr.
Yeah, I can come in here. Thank you very much in the first place for having me. And from an industrial consumer's point of view, and yeah, well, the Commission is doing this also in order to push industrial consumers to to climate neutrality. There's a race going on. It has started, and everybody's looking at possibilities of having access to climate neutral electricity. Well, because for most industrial processes, the road to climate neutrality goes through electrification. So significant additional needs of carbon neutral electricity. There are only 3 ways to that known today. Maybe technology will evolve in other domains. Either you go for renewables, with or without storage, with or without conversion to molecules, and then back to electricity. Second route is through CCS, CCU, and the third is nuclear. And that are the 3 choices we have, and that's what industrial companies are looking at. If they want to electrify their processes, they need huge volumes of electricity produced by either of these technologies. But there is more, and that is the specific role of SMRs. A lot of industries also need a lot of heat. Today, heat is generally produced with natural gas or even coal or other fossil fuels. We can use SMRs, AMRs as a resource for producing combined heat and power, and that is, I think, something new in what industries look at in the possibilities with nuclear. And then the third possibility, I think it was discussed in depth yesterday, is of course you can also produce hydrogen with nuclear power in a climate neutral way. So the color of it you can choose, whether it's green or pink or whatever, but it is climate neutral. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to actually invite Mrs. Evans to the discussion regarding this European perspective and you know, what do we need to do in order to have the fuel supply for all the SMRs and the growth in nuclear happening in the future?
Thank you, Petra. I think, first of all, we need to look at SMR, LWR SMR, which are based on existing technology for the fuel cycle. We will need to extend our capacities to feed both the large water reactors and the small light water reactors. And this will require the supply chain to invest in conversion or mining conversion, enrichment, with significant investments representing over 1 billion euros for the OECD countries. I think that's one point. On the other side, we need to look at the AMR and the variety of the fuel cycle. Innovative fuel with different technologies, which requires some development. There is an emerging market. The market is not here yet. And for that, the industry and operators will need to have a public-private partnership in order to develop the required supply chain. My last point is also for that technologies, we probably will need to have rationalization of technologies because we cannot have many fuel cycles and deliver the right or the competitive supply chain to feed numerous AMRs. And last but not least, I would say that to finance that, the EU has launched a taxonomy and includes part of nuclear in it, but they will need to include the full supply chain, and fuel cycle will need to be included in that.
Yes, I'd actually like to kind of continue on this financing perspective and invite Mr. Begvedem. What are your thoughts as a European private investors on what you just heard regarding the ambitions in Europe?
Thank you very much. Good morning. So I'm not entrepreneur and sounds curious. I'm an entrepreneur and I raise funds. I develop specialized funds in deep tech, in the quantum technologies, for instance, in the new space area. And I believe with my colleagues at Audacia, my firm, that there is also a huge challenge, of course, in energy transition. and that's why I'm here. We are developing a fund called Hexagon, dedicated to energy transition through the deep tech angle. And so it's a 300 million fund that will invest in Europe. We are based in Paris, and we're open to partnerships to open other, by the way, branches elsewhere in Europe, like we did in New Space, where we have a partnership with Swedish people. But coming back to our subject here, so energy transition, the International Energy Association tells it very clearly. We will miss by a factor of 2 the objective in 2050 if we don't develop new technological solutions. I'm not talking about new science. The science has been done. It's technological solutions that need to be developed, and that is the reason why we have created that fund, and we have already started to deploy capital in, for instance, in companies that are being spin-offed from CEA, Commissariat à l'Énergie Atomique in France, because these technologies are known, they are in a way on the shelves, and they need to be developed. But it will take time, it will take a lot of capital, and so, yeah, we need private capital, that's what we do, and the opportunity is so huge that we can convince institutional investors, industrial investors, family offices to trust us and to commit capital in our fund, and we then select the right entrepreneurs, the right teams, based on the right technology, the huge size of the market, of course, and the people. But it's also important that there are some public support. And coming back to Mr. from the Commission, I think, of course, in France we have a mechanism. It's called France 2030. We all know it, and there is a clear pocket targeted to development of new nuclear. I think we should have something at the European scale, obviously, because there will be also a need for consolidation. We will need to create European leaders in this new nuclear field that emerge and become worldwide leaders. It's also an issue for reindustrialization of Europe and creating also jobs and export sums that, excédents commerciaux. I don't know how to say that in English, sorry, but you will understand. And so it's really important to have this mix of private and public support, especially in that field in nuclear. And of course, politics sometimes make things a little bit complicated in that field, but I hope we can have this type of mechanism in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we will change gears a little bit and move over to the licensing issues. And I'm very honored to have Commissioner Kader Messier here on our panel. And I would like to ask you now that as the Commissioner of ASN, what are the challenges and uncertainties you are seeing in AMRs, advanced reactors and SMRs? For your introductory 3 minutes.
Okay, thanks for the question. So for me, I would say the first challenge concerns harmonization. And harmonization is often called by project developers, and in fact it is to ensure standardization, which is necessary for SMR business model because it requires identical production in large numbers. But we have to say clearly that harmonization concerns both licensing process, and in fact, licensing process is really specific to each country, and therefore, I must say very clearly that it is unrealistic to try to harmonize it. Concerning the safety requirements, in fact, they are very similar from one country to another because they are based on the same standards, and so, for me, it's not an obstacle for standardization. However, I would say the approaches to demonstrate that the project developer meet these requirements are quite different from one country to another. So it is a question. What you have to know as well is that there is a fundamental principle of national sovereignty in matters of nuclear safety, and therefore there can be no international certification in nuclear no automatic or blind recognition of authorization provided by other countries. So now the question is how to proceed. I believe really that the best option is that the national authorities work together at a very early stage of the development of reactors to jointly examine the safety file provided by the developer. This was done, for example, for the NEWARD project. And in addition, there are many multilateral initiatives that are being carried out. And I would like to mention one specifically, which is the safety objective for WNE, because safety objective is key for harmonization and after that for standardization. The second challenge concerns, I would say, some specific, element of features, and I would like to focus on two. First of all, it is SMR's location. Regarding the location of SMRs, there is a fundamental difference between large installation and the small innovative reactors, especially AMRs. In fact, the location of large installation is planned at the design. The location of SMRs, especially AMRs, at the design is not known. It will depend on the location of the clients. So the clients will be industrial installation or urban areas. And so you can see that the location will be much closer to densely populated areas. And this, I believe, it is a question that is to be addressed, in particular with regard to the fact that it is very close to people. And this question should be, investigated at a very early stage and really before it is rotated. The second point I would say as issue I would like to mention, it is proven technology. Technology used in the design of a nuclear installation are required to be proven or qualified by design, by testing or analysis. And of course, if SMRs use innovative technologies, that means there is no feedback. And so that means as well that R&D has to be carried out to demonstrate the safety of the technologies. And the problem is that R&D takes time, and it requires as well experimental infrastructures that have to be developed. And really these infrastructures are key for test, for demonstration, for clarification of material, of technology, and in particular with regard to qualification of physical phenomena. And the last point was, I would say, it was the same as Jan. There was some prerequisite for SMR deployment. First one is the readiness of all the actors. So when I say all the actors, it is, of course, decision makers, industry, supply chain, R&D, and of course, regulators. And as it was said before, it's very clear that the readiness of SMR business model should consider, I would say, an integrated view. That means we spoke about nuclear fuel supply, but I think that waste is very important, and the management of waste should be addressed at a very early stage, specifically because it will be no new waste, and maybe there are no waste management for this one.
Thank you, Commissioner. Actually, I'm looking at the gentleman here to my right, because in Canada there is, actually quite active progress in deploying the first SMR. And would there be, on your side, Mr. Gorman, any reflections on the licensing difficulty, situation, challenges?
Sure. Thank you, Petra. I'm happy to comment on licensing. It's wonderful to be up here with this esteemed panel, so thank you for the invitation and all of you for joining us today. I think we Canadians sometimes feel that on the international stage we have a reputation for being quite humble, apologetic even, but I'm not feeling humble or apologetic today when I tell you that Canada is going to be the first G7 nation that connects a small modular reactor to the grid. It is not just the 8 BWRXs, the General Electric Hitachi's that we have announced we're going to build. That first one is going to be connected before 2030, putting 300 megawatts on the grid. And as I said, another 3 in Ontario and then 4 in Saskatchewan. We have Three other technologies that are under development right now. All three have been announced. All other three have been announced and are going through the licensing process right now. That includes two microreactor technologies, one by Westinghouse and one by Global First Power, and another one that is in the 100 megawatt high temperature heat, sort of molten salt one. All of them developing, and we'll see some of those smaller ones even before 2030. So I hope I get an opportunity to speak later about how it is that Canada has been able to achieve that. But certainly the thing that could hold us back is a licensing issue. And in the Canadian context, it really has to do with the overlap between our national nuclear regulator and a separate national stream that we have for environmental approvals, project approvals, impact assessment. And we are working through as a nation right now how it is that we streamline the role of the federal nuclear, the national nuclear regulator with the national approvals process overall. And then when you layer in under that provincial involvement, which is because in the Canadian context, energy is a provincial matter, we have the prospect here of it taking a very long time to get approvals to go ahead and actually get projects built. So from a licensing perspective, I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how we're working through that, and our federal nuclear regulator has been quite proactive on this front. But it's going to take more than just good coordination between those three levels of project approvals. It's going to take a breakthrough, and so we're laser focused on that right now.
Maybe to the commissioner, any spontaneous reactions? And then I also still wanted to ask that are you also very actively cooperating, let's say, in the regulator networks with the Canadians, with NRC, and how would you characterize this around in the SMR issues, basically?
So clearly, the regulators are coordinating. So three different initiatives. First one, I would say it is the NES initiative within IAA. Second one is at the European level, and Jan before spoke about the EU partnership. And the third one is about New World. Maybe you have heard about the joint early review, which was performed by three regulators for the same design. And it was very interesting, both for the regulators, because they see that, I would say, the approach may be different for the same subject. They may interpret the requirements. And so I would say it gives some ideas to evolve nationally. And I think for the vendor, it was very fruitful as well, because it gives us some feedback about the design, and it is a path, I would say, to standardization, or to have, I would say, better chance for standardized design. And I would say, due to this success, we enter a second phase for New World with 3 new regulators. So it is Sweden, Poland, and Netherlands. And so you see that with new topics, and we chose topics which are very important, either for safety or either for the design, which is very important to have for the developer at a very early stage. And so you see with 6 regulators, with 6 different, maybe regulatory framework, I think really it's a good way to have, I would say, to go towards standardization.
Thank you. And now, actually, I'd like to invite Dr. Huff to provide the US viewpoint regarding SMR and AMR technologies and the key stakeholders and how to overcome the potential challenges for your introductory remarks on this topic. Please, Dr. Huff.
I'm setting my watch because there are so many micro and small and advanced reactor companies in the United States that I could go on and on and on. I promise I shall not. You know, I think we really are in the place that everyone's described here, where there are some very specific challenges around the supply chain as we look at what it looks like to deploy at scale some of these technologies, and there are some specific challenges around ensuring that licensing goes quickly. In the United States, of course, we're also seeing that there are financial challenges in ensuring that risk can be reduced, risk specifically around cost and schedule overruns that are common in really big mega projects and first-of-a-kind technologies, regardless of whether they're nuclear or not. And in the Department of Energy, which of course I'm the Assistant Secretary of Nuclear Energy in the Department of Energy in the US government, and our role is to reduce risk in a variety of ways. And I think this is the role of most governments, but in the United States, of course, we have a very specific kind of separation between our government and our industry that needs to allow that industry to be incentivized by the government, guided with a vision, but through research and development that reduces the risks of technology deployment. And through financial incentives, we have seen some real successes in our industry. We have a embarrassment of riches in terms of these reactor technologies. We have multiple light water reactors, small modular reactors based on American technology, including Westinghouse AP300, the Holtec SMR 160, the NuScale SMR 6-pack or 12-pack of Voyager reactors. Of course, there's also the GE BWRX 300 that we are really excited to see being deployed at incredible scale very soon in our neighbors to the north in Canada. But of course, just after OPG starts those deployments, we expect TVA in the United States to join with deployments of that reactor type. Beyond those light water small modular reactors, there are micro heat pipe reactors like Westinghouse's eVinci reactor or high temperature gas reactors, whether it's the pebble bed style X-Energy XE100 type or a more prismatic core ultra-safe nuclear corporation type. There's small sodium-cooled fast reactors like the TerraPower Natrium reactor that's being built under DOE financial support in Wyoming at the site of a retiring coal plant. Or there's the small Oklo reactor that's launching out into some power purchase agreements with some of our DOE energy facility communities, including, for example, in Ohio. We have small modular molten salt reactors, whether they're solid fueled like the Kairos, pebble bed, fluoride salt cooled high temperature reactor design, the Hermes, or liquid fueled. TerraPower has a molten chloride fast reactor design that DOE is helping deploy through a test reactor in Idaho, the national laboratory under my authority. So we have a lot going on, and the real question is, can we be coherent? For example, as Cecilia, you made an incredibly important point about making sure that we can't deploy every single technology efficiently. And ideally, it would be nice to see some technologies be coherent. And I think, especially in the supply chain sense, it would be nice to see not necessarily a full standardization of supply chain component standards across all countries, which is potentially unrealistic, much like nuclear regulatory harmonization in a complete sense. I think what would be nice is to see some coherent adoption of key components and auxiliary measures, parts of your supply chains that you can share. We'll see those economies of scale. And I think having that coherence, whether it's in the supplier of your medium and large forgings and end stampings, or even just the standards around which you deploy pumps and concrete deployments and things of this nature. So we're really interested in seeing all of this work efficiently. But I think the critical point that we see in the Department of Energy is nicely captured by two reports around, one was from our National Academy of Sciences this year around the challenges facing advanced reactors. It's 130 pages that I'm sure this panel will handle in a full hour. We'll probably touch every point that they've pointed out. And our liftoff reports that were released in March last year around this technology, addressing what it takes to get to commercial liftoff, to reach our 2050 goals around the climate. It's going to take a lot of supply chain build out. And I think the critical point that I want to leave you with in this context that I worry about at night is that supply chain build out, I used to be a professor, and this is like a homework assignment. We have to meet this deadline in 2050. We have to decarbonize. I mean, our fate depends on it. There will be no homework extensions. So we should not wait until 2049 to completely decarbonize the planet. This is obvious. It's obvious for our own survival, but it's also importantly that kind of last-minute build-out requires a much larger capacity for the supply chain. You would have to build all of your pressure vessels the night before too, and all of your pumps and components and everything out there on that exhibition floor would need to build out an incredible capacity of throughput in order to support a build-out of, for example, thrice as many reactors in 2050 as we have now. So we should do it tomorrow so that we can get started on that homework so that our supply chain doesn't have to be overbuilt, which will be significantly harder and more expensive. So I'll leave you with that thought. Don't do your homework at the last minute. Back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Huff, for excellent points. And now there was actually, Mr. Gorman wanted to react.
I did. I wanted to pick up on one of the many important points that Dr. Huff made. Katie, I was wondering if you were going to challenge the first in the G7 group to connect an SMR, but I think this is, I just wanted to comment on the sort of co-opetition that we have going on between the United States and Canada, which I think is motivating both nations to really try to deliver in a cooperative way, but to as fast timelines as possible. And Katie's leadership certainly, with that spirit of cooperation, has resulted in a lot of bilateral activity, which is really helping around issues like regulatory harmonization and streamlining supply chain issues, et cetera. But Katie, the point that I wanted to pick up on was just this point about risk. And you know, you say government's role in helping mitigate risk, and we often think about risk in the financial context, but I think everyone needs to realize as well that we're dealing with an electricity sector which is inherently risk adverse, and so you're dealing with a very long conventional industry which doesn't like to take risks, and then you layer on top of that not only nuclear technology but the regulator's role, which is inherently risk adverse, and so how is it that we do encourage risk taking within the proper boundaries? Innovation and risk-taking in the electricity, nuclear, and the regulatory side, I think, is a really important issue that we have to grapple with.
Any immediate thoughts on that one?
Well, I will say, in this National Academies report, the National Academies in the US indicated that there are a number of things we can do to reduce financial risk through tax credits, through cooperation, cost sharing, through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States, which represent really historic levels of industrial policy. We have been able to execute those two things, but it doesn't go as far as I think industry would really like to see in the near term. They would love to see some kind of cost or risk overrun insurance for cost and timeline overruns. And it's a little unclear how to structure this or whether the government even necessarily needs to be involved. One can imagine a very clever, you know, Lloyd's of London insurance strategy that's quite unique for the nuclear industry, where a group of utilities could, for example, buy in to share the risk of the first 5 or 10 units of a particular kind of design. But it probably will need to involve some government support or backing or assurance. And I think that kind of activity does really stretch what's possible in a budget-constrained environment like the United States, you know, budgets are sometimes.
I'd like to invite Mr. Panek. What are your thoughts regarding what's going on in the US and Canada?
I was going to react to indeed what was said by both John and Kathy, but not to comment on what they do over there, because it's impressive, but I think what is important for us is what we need to do in Europe. As much as we can learn from what they do in Canada and the US, we should, but I think we have equal challenge in Europe. We have a decarbonization objective. And I think Catherine Huff was right. The plethora of technologies, particularly the AMR technologies that present themselves, is quite impressive. Some of them are actually there. You can visit their stands. It's very inspiring to hear all these innovative thoughts. But I think it was Cecil Evans who spoke with respect to the fuel cycle, that we need to start from what exists, what is available on the market. And I think that applies in the broader sense for SMRs. I think we will need advanced concepts and designs of SMRs. We will need the AMRs. particularly for example, Peter Claes's case of the industry that will need high temperature heat. But I think we should not translate this into a policy that would be just looking at the advanced technologies and just trying to stimulate further research and perfection of the potential of SMRs. I think we have a present challenge. We need to deploy them now. Catherine was right. We cannot wait until 2050. We can't even wait until 2030, maybe. You know, we need to start yesterday. And this is actually what the policymakers in Europe are trying to do. They're trying to say, well, let's deploy what is available off the shelf for the first most evident opportunities for small and modular reactors. And in parallel, we continue developing technologies that will, as soon as available, come in and further enlarge the possible use of SMRs. But let's not forego that immediate, the low-hanging fruits for the vision of tomorrow. I think we need a dual approach. And even deploying what is off the shelf available will be challenging because it has not yet been done. We are still waiting for the first SMRs to really come physically on stream and see what all that entails. But I think we should not just chase the holy grail of the best AMR of the future. We also need to, get
very good
working.
point. Thank you, Mr. Panek. And now, before we continue with our round here, I would actually like to look into, fantastic, we have a question from the audience. Now let's see, are we getting a mic for you?
Thank you. I'm Brian Fehrenbach with the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries. And one proud Canadian to another, John, I'd like to follow up on your comments about being the first G7 country to deploy what we call a Stream 1, likely a Stream 2, and for sure Stream 3 units that you mentioned. How is that? How have we been able to get to the position where we have such an active plan and such great cooperation across our country that's enabling us to hand in our homework first to Dr. Huff?
So, please.
Thank you, Brian. And I think you've done Petra a favor as well, because that may be verbatim the question that you were going to ask me on the panel next. So we're two birds with one stone. Brian, I was going to say the answer to the Canadian success has been your leadership with the supply chain, but I'll say it's got to be a little bit more than that. The Canadian case study is quite interesting. If I had to make one comment about how it is that Canada has, despite being a very large nation geographically, with a small population and 10 different provinces, which all have very different resources at their disposal. I mean, it's just so diverse in that respect, and the politics are very confusing. What has helped us is an extraordinary level of collaboration between our provincial governments, and in the case of Canada, in almost all instances, in 9 of the 10 provinces, we have crown utilities, government-owned utilities who are responsible for the electricity grid in each of, and the energy systems in each of those provinces. And so when those crown utilities decided to collaborate, it enabled a level of collaboration, coordination that gave birth to a roadmap for how we develop and deploy small modular reactors in the nation. And so now 4 of our 10 nations are very engaged in developing and deploying small modular reactors. And of course, the leadership of the federal government layered on top of that with various incentives and other policy mechanisms that have encouraged the adoption of nuclear have just sort of cleared the pathway to do that. Nuclear, really, I think we've seen globally, is able to span politics, the spectrum of politics. It can be a nonpartisan issue in many nations. And it certainly is in Canada. Both the right and the left end of the spectrum support nuclear. And so it's enabled the federal government to play a national role in collaborating with these provinces of other types of politics. So it really has been collaboration and coordination that has been a key to our success.
Thank you. Let's see, are there any other questions? I can see a question here in the audience, please.
Does it work? Yes, thank you. Laurent Leveugle, Vice President for New Nuclear at Fortum.
Run, close.
Thank you for the good panel. One question, at Fortum we talk a lot about customer centricity. And one question I have for you, in Finland also we have a good experience of first of a kind construction. So how do you think we can manage expectations from the customers, from the industry in terms of budget, schedule and competitiveness of the first units? The beauty of SMRs is that when we can build a lot, when it's optimized, the competitiveness will be there. But what do you think about the first project? How can we manage the expectations?
Are you addressing the question to somebody in particular?
I think I have an idea. So
Please,
think,
Dr. Huff.
you know, how do you manage the expectations when we have the first few are definitely going to go over budget and over schedule periodically, and you're going to not see those, you know, economies of scale until the nth of a kind for some of these small modular reactors. I think it helps when you have a government-owned utility that can take on some of that risk on behalf of the customer, right? In the case of, for example, in the United States and other nations that don't have that, and instead the customers are going to be almost explicitly private industry, we can invent a customer out of the federal government. The United States federal government recently, under my president, executed an executive order indicating that we should lead in the federal consumption of electricity, the change to cleaner electricity. So while the nation's goal is to get to zero carbon electricity by 2035, the federal government buildings and facilities and cars and whatnot, we're going to try to get to zero carbon electricity by 2030, which is really, really hard, but it may require, you know, our federal government acting as a customer in a way we haven't before. So even nations where we don't have a natural built-in customer in the utilities have federal governments that are usually incredible consumers of energy. And that's an opportunity. But merging away from that federal support, I think one thing that you can do is just be quite frank about this message and not oversell. I think we do really get damaged when we have to walk back promises made, whether it's by your company or another company in the same sector. Over-promising can really hurt us in the long run. So ensuring that everyone understands what it's like to build a spoon factory. You know, the first spoon is not $1, right? You build a prototype spoon in your kitchen, it's quite different than building a prototype spoon at a spoon factory. And I think it's critical that we share that message pretty far and wide and consistently across companies.
Yeah, very, very true. And now Mr. Panek had a comment.
Yes, I wanted to, but before I say what I wanted to say, I want to react to something that Catherine has said about honesty and passing the right message and information. I think, indeed, this is crucial. You know, my portfolio includes not only the traditional nuclear energy and ergo, therefore, also SMRs, but also ITER and fusion. And this is a place where we have seen a big expansion of new concepts and initiatives, a lot of them promising to have fusion on the grid almost yesterday. And I think it's good to have this challenge to the traditional incumbents in the fusion development. But it also has to come with a lot of critical scrutiny to see what of those new stories that appear may actually be perhaps overselling some parts of the story. And I think we have the same risk with SMRs. They are now very sexy. They are very, nice to talk about. And therefore, you can easily also end up with stories that may not actually add up together. And I think it's part of the task of the policymakers, but all public institutions, including the regulators, not just the policymakers, to make sure that we see through that fog of all that PR. And we really make sure that we build the case for SMRs on what is reliable. Now back to the question that came from the floor, I think one option is more or less what was presented now in the US case, to basically say, okay, it's an externality, there is a role for the government to play, let's put money in it as part of the de-risking strategy. But maybe there are other ways, there are other possibilities for the public institutions. And given that SMRs, as I was saying in the beginning, are the ticket for the nuclear sector to step out of the traditional frame, maybe we should also think innovative about public assistance. Maybe there is one option of putting public money for the first projects, but maybe the alternative is to actually make through public policies, make it certain through public policies that the first mover will have as much assurance as possible that the first project will not be also the last. If we help to build the industrial chain in Europe that will allow the production in series, if we support the regulators in their efforts to cooperate and coordinate amongst themselves so that the licensing processes run smooth and fast, recognizing the fact that the technologies will be quasi-standardized, there we are creating an environment in which the first mover will know that if the first mover manages well the risks of the first project, it will be easy afterwards to replicate it because there will be the welcoming or the nurturing background available.
Thank you. And now Mr. Begbeder wanted to react, and when you are responding, then please move on to your own introductory remarks also, which was about the question that what's the role of private capital in supporting and fostering the development in new nuclear technologies. So react and then your introductory remarks, please.
All is linked. In fact, so it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a long road along these technologies have to be developed. We need them, and it's going to take 10 years, 15 years. And so to answer also the question of the gentleman about the consumers, the industrial consumers that need to decarbonize, they also need to prepare 10 years in advance. And so they listened to what we say. They said, oh, well, great, maybe there is a solution coming in 2030, but they need, I think, we all need milestones. You know, we need the policymakers to organize some kinds of milestone of gates that will help the industrial customers, that will help the VC investors to accompany the projects, those new players, step by step, and help them having the financial means, private and public, to deliver. And it will help the industrial customers as well. And when I'm talking about policies, I'm also including, of course, safety, obviously, and the regulators. So we need this. We need that we cooperate together to define this road. Otherwise, we see it's going to generate a lot of uncertainties, and finally, we will probably not make it.
And then also, maybe still to Mr. Begbeder, is there something we could learn from, let's say, the venture capital mindset in developing technologies and developing business models? I know you have a long background in. Could you elaborate on this?
Yes, certainly. For me, it's the same. We are talking about deep tech. So there is a lot of risks. But whether it's new space or quantum technologies or new nuclear AMR, for me, it's the same. So again, it's no more science. The technology, the science has been done, and we have to take out of the laboratories those that already done science and transform it into new technologies and industry. And so our job is to negotiate and with the public laboratories and select the teams and then help them to start to create their firms and to develop and all along the road from its early venture capital, so pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, until they are ready to commercialize. But we need those milestones, those gates from the policymakers to help all of us to understand where we are at each stage. And I've seen some companies in that sector that have that went very fast and that are already raising a lot of capital. Maybe it's a little bit premature. I prefer do it more slowly. It's risky. So the market is huge, so that's great. There is a potential huge return that can be made, but it's very risky. So the entry price for the private sector has to be low, and then grow progressively. Okay.
Maybe here I'd like to involve Dr. Huff also, because we see, of course, a lot of interesting startup type of VC new ideas from the United States also in this space, actually. Surprisingly much. What is your perspective? How is it going? Will it kind of spur some new kind of innovativity? Or will it be the big players then in any case and the states coming in? Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so I will resist the urge to pick winners. It's well outside of my role in the government to say who's going to win in this race, but I will tell you this. As a normal nuclear engineer, 10 years ago, we started to see these startups come up, and there were 1, and then 2, and then 3, and now 40, right? And I fully expected, ignorantly perhaps, that by 10 years from now, by today, we would have seen a lot of acquisitions and mergers and a lot of like companies not succeed, and that by now we would be down to 5 key fundamental players. It's been quite the opposite. Every time I turn around, I meet someone who says, hey, you know what, I just started up a new microreactor company and we're in our pre-seed round of funding and like we're getting all this extra. And it's mind-blowing to me. It is extremely uncomfortable for the American nuclear industry that has like moved in a very different way historically. But I think it feels good in the United States where this is extremely common in every other deep tech field, this sort of thing, and we are getting used to it. And I think one thing that we are going to have to get used to has sort of gently been alluded to in a number of places, and so I'll just address it here in the spirit of honesty and transparency, is that, just a few weeks ago, NuScale announced, and along with the UAMPS, that their carbon-free power project, which DOE, of course, was supporting, will not continue to move forward past the specific utility decision gate that they made. Again, our utilities are not owned by the government and sometimes can't take as much risk as they were planning on. That's the case in this case. Fatih Birol acknowledged this happened in his main comments in the original keynote in the beginning of this conference. And he has the right message, I think, that's going to be very hard for us, but we're going to have to get used to with these startups, is that sometimes a project will fail. It doesn't mean the whole company is going under. Sometimes a company will fail. It doesn't mean the whole field is going under. And this is very new for us in the US. So that's the thing I think that's the most awkward so far.
Yeah, very wise words. Brief comment by Mr. Gorman on this issue.
Very brief. Just wanted to build off of Katie's comments. In the Canadian context, we spent quite a bit of time agonizing as both as industry, as government, and the regulator in terms of how we were going to down-select technologies over the last 3 years, because at one point we had 12 different technologies going through the review process with our regulator, and clearly, capacity becomes an issue. But to this competitiveness aspect and comment that Katie made, we're seeing that play out in markets now too. And you're right, we're not used to it as a nuclear industry to see this competitive element. There will be projects that fail. There may be even corporations that fail. But in the Canadian context, we have seen the competition play out so that the ones who have an operator partner and a customer, or a customer both, those are the ones that are beginning to pull ahead of the field, and we'll see some attrition. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And now let's move on to the next perspective and Mr. Klaas. And the question would be that we need to decarbonize and find climate neutral non-fossil energy sources. How do we do this? And then the energy consumer perspective to this whole thing, and that was already in the question also. Please, your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I've been listening with a lot of attention to what is happening. Maybe just a few words on the situation also in Europe, and we have this particular situation today that energy prices are still very high in Europe after the gas crisis. Some politicians say, well, it's over. No, it's not over. I mean, we still have gas prices, for instance, in Europe that are 7-8 times the level in the US. So this is an extra stimulus, I think, for European industry to look into other technologies. Maybe also compliment to what Mr. Panek said. Yes, build new nuclear now. Do not wait until we have the perfect solution, if that is possible. Also extend what we have. I think it's a bit a shame that a lot of countries in Europe are also looking at closing existing nuclear plants where they could be extended and where you could use their production in order to bridge the time to new developments in technology. So some countries, my country, is closing down nuclear plants and replacing them by gas power plants. I don't know that we are doing the right thing there in that choice. The question you asked, Petra. I mean, we have a mission. We have a target. The target is to be carbon neutral by 2050. Some companies are even trying to go faster. Some countries are also trying to go faster. And then industrial consumers tend to act rationally and look at the possibilities they have. We also see that, again, in Europe, we are reaching some levels of renewables penetration where it starts, I would say, to hurt. I have nothing against renewables. We're completely technology neutral. We accept everything that can help. But at a certain moment, intermittent renewables start to hurt. You have an easy problem with renewables, that is backup. You can build backup plants, but you have a much more difficult problem today with renewables. That is in what we call incompressibility. When you have too much generation of renewables, you have to do something with it. You have the need for grid expansion, which is in Europe talking about licensing for that is getting a huge problem. Moreover, if you want to put more offshore wind in the North Sea, you need longer cables. You need more infrastructure to do that. So this is for different reasons a time to develop again or to go further with nuclear as the third alternative to climate neutrality. Maybe last word on I like the word readiness that was used. Everybody needs to be ready for I mean. We still see people that do not want to fly. We still see people that do not want smart meters because they have a problem with the privacy. You will always have people that do not like nuclear. I think it's up to the nuclear industry to prove also that it is possible to run that safely, to run that reliably, and to run that climate neutrally, if I can tell it that way. So let us from industry look at the possibilities we have. Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the view on nuclear in Europe was completely different from now, with the crisis, with a certain number of other elements. This is an opportunity to give also industry and households access to new nuclear technology or existing nuclear technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to actually now address Commissioner Kademessier. I mean, if we think about, you referred to it actually in your introductory remarks already, that there's quite a lot of interest in district heat applications from nuclear reactor, and they might be smaller reactor, smaller scale, and they might be located close to population in a whole, the siting philosophy might be very, very different in these new cases that many customers are interested in. That could you elaborate a little bit? Can we get around this? Do you think this could happen through some very good technological development, or could you elaborate a little bit on this point still?
In fact, it's very difficult to speak about acceptability. and because nuclear is often considered as danger first, and so that means there is a need for information to get people, as I aware of what is nuclear installation, what are the risks, and so on. And so that's why I speak about early stage, because if you arrive and say to, let's say, community, you will have a reactor within 2 years, I think it is quite sure it will be a failure. But if you try to, I would say, I don't know if it's educate people, but I would say, perform things so that people are aware and can have an opinion about it. And so this is very difficult. And so there is a group that will work on that in Industrial Alliance. And in France, we have a commission, local information for information. And so there is a big question about that. And so we speak often about public acceptance. So some people say public engagement, because acceptance means you have to accept. And so maybe it's a problem to speak like that. It's quite sure. And I think this will be really a difficulty. And I know that in France, there were already some industries that request, I'd say, okay, it would be nice to have SMRs or AMR, to have it. And after that, they understood that there is a lot of things to do. And I would say, in France at least, there is, I would say, transparency is very important, and they're not aware that transparency is more important than in other sectors. And so you see, it is a mood, and they have to change the mood. And in France, what is very clear, the industrial installation, so the industrials, they don't want to be licensee, okay? So there will be a licensee. And the question, of course, is, for people around, okay, but in 10 years, am I sure that the licensee will be still there? There will be, I would say, something to decommission and so on. So you see, people they have to have information on that. And to be clear, in France, we are very accustomed to have only one licensee, and a very big one, powerful, engineering, and so on. And seeing a lot of different startups, it raises questions. And so this should be addressed really, I would say, from now on, because in 10 years it will be too late. But it's not, I would say, the job of the regulators. The regulators can be, I would say, with the industry to explain, to give their position. But for me, it is a licensee, and it is like, he has a prime responsibility for safety. And after that, regulator can explain what is the position, and it is what we do, I would say, every day.
Yeah, very, very clear. Thank you. Now, moving on, and as we referred to maybe very, very early on already, all these super interesting prospects, they will, I mean, be that SMRs, well, AMRs, they can almost, you know, they can be breeders and what have you, but they will require fuel, and the fuel cycle must be robust. So could you, Mrs. Evans, please elaborate on this topic in your own 3 minutes, please?
Okay, thank you. I would start by the need to have a comprehensive fuel cycle, starting from mining, ending up to an integrated spent fuel management and waste management. The second aspect is that, as I told early, we see many technologies with advanced fuel technologies requiring different fuel form material to feed them. Some of them needs LEU plus or HLEU because of efficiency of the smaller core required. Some technologies will be fed with reusable material from spent fuel, so reprocessing and recycling of spent fuel will be needed. I would say that we will have numerous technologies in numerous locations, and we need to implement efforts to deploy the supply chains, up to the fuel supply chain and the spent fuel management program in terms of technology developments, type of material which will be required, type of waste form which will end up from the reactors, nuclear facilities, but not only. We will need HR, we will need financing, and we will need regulatory framework. So I think on top of that, we need to take into account that spent fuel management are a question of national policy, and all those technology will need to be integrated in the national policies. Last point I would like to emphasize is that a key topic we need not to forget is the need for logistic and transport, which will be required to supply all those reactors. So cooperation between all stakeholders to ensure integration for the demand requirements, to bring confidence and visibility for the industrial to invest is needed. I would say that we will need, like I said, to invest in capabilities and capacities, and we'll need private and public finance. Again, standardization or at least rationalization will be needed to develop a reliable industrial processes beyond just the prototype, because we need to deliver a commercial fleet. Now, if we move to the spent fuel management, we will need to have optimum program, not only looking at interim storage, but up to the final disposal of the waste embedded in the spent fuel. And this is a key point to reduce risk and also to gain public support. I would also say that the demand of new nuclear, whether it's large scale or SMR, may bring some constraints of natural resources. And recycling technologies may be a way to improve the need for natural uranium, as currently, if we implement recycling scheme in current technology, we can save up to 40% of natural uranium. If we move to generation 4 reactors, we may save up to 100% of natural resources. The other angle, I'm nearly finished. The other angle also to integrate is the interest of implementing recycling technologies to standardize waste form to be disposed and integrate a fuel cycle for many technologies. And finally, I would also talk about the need to maybe develop some shared infrastructures which will serve many countries or many reactors in a countries. For instance, we can highlight the role of the Urano platform, recycling platform, which serve many countries, and for which we are looking at its renewal to pursue or continue deliver services to the end of the century, not only for existing technology, but embarking small modular reactors and advanced reactors.
Thank you, Mrs. Evans. And now Mr. Gorman had a question.
Petra has allowed me to ask a question of a fellow panelist, so I'm going to put Dr. Huff on the spot, but purely because I'm interested to hear your current take on the sort of geopolitics around the the fuel ecosystem. I'm so glad we're talking about fuel. We don't speak about that enough as an industry, and things have changed so much over the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I think anyone who has spent any time around me in the last year and a half knows that I wake up in the morning thinking about enriched uranium and I fall asleep at night thinking about enriched uranium. We are gravely concerned, of course, in the US that the role that Russia plays in this provision of enriched uranium really puts into perspective the riskiness of our fuel supply chain, the weakness of some of the links in that supply chain, and really puts into sharp contrast the importance that for our energy security across all nations that use enriched uranium, we need to ensure a conversion and enrichment and mining supply that is from trusted sources. I've been really lucky over the last little while to work with colleagues in Enercan, in France, Japan, the UK, and Canada, and the US. We have committed to identify ways to work together to find the resources and deploy the resources necessary to expand our conversion and enrichment capacity to displace Russian uranium. We've made some statements on this topic, and we're really putting, some pedal to the metal recently, and I'm extremely proud to be a part of that engagement, but it's gonna take a lot of investment from private industry too in those technologies, whether it's, Orano or others. I think we have, you mentioned the importance of recycling potentially playing an important role in ensuring a fuel supply. I think this is also true. We would really love to generally see all nations that are concerned about that fuel supply really take a hard look at the trustworthiness of their fuel supply chain and consider really long-term contracts with the trusted sources they would like to be partnered with instead. Russia's role in enrichment and conversion has really put at risk about 20% of the imports into the United States existing commercial fleet. And so we import an incredible amount of uranium fuel and need to get away from that in the very short term. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Huff. And I'd like to address a little bit the similar question to Mr. Panek, that what is the view of the Commission? Do we need to invest more in the nuclear fuel supply chain, let's put it like that, also in Europe, considering the geopolitical tensions and exactly the factors that Dr. Huff was referring to regarding the enriched uranium, where it comes from. So any thoughts on this one, please?
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are three issues on this. One is the challenge that we are currently facing in the last 2 years with respect to partial dependency on Russia. It's the case in the US, it's the case in Europe as well. In Europe, it does not concern, contrary to maybe a prevailing perception, it does not concern only the 5 member states with Russian design reactors. It concerns practically all countries in Europe using nuclear technology. We have about 20% dependency overall on fuel services still coming from Russia, and that clearly creates a strategic challenge. So I think that needs to be resolved. We need diversification of the fuel supply, and we've been working on that, and I think there have been public announcements by the VVR countries or utilities on alternative contracts that have been signed with providers or suppliers from the West. But that's only one part of the story. And of course, as I said, it does not only concern the VVR countries. I think we need to look at dependency in all countries, and not just on fuel services, also on spare parts, on maintenance services. But with respect to fuel, the challenge of dependency on Russia is just one aspect. The second aspect is the fact that we don't have sufficient capacities for conversion in particular, but also enrichment, not only in Europe, but also across the Atlantic in what we could call the global West. I think that calls for collaborative approaches, that calls for extra investment, expansion of capacity, that the industry can technically do, but I understand that they need to see the business case for that and the long-term prospect of demand. And I think giving signals on that will be important. Then the third issue is indeed the innovative part. The fact that for AMRs, different new fuel that is not currently available, that is not currently manufactured will be needed. But it is not, and it is not just a question of fuel for the SMRs. I think we will need advanced fuels also for the traditional technologies. We will need accident-tolerant fuel. It's part of our taxonomy requirements. But for SMRs in particular, it obviously creates enormous new opportunity, but also a task for the fuel industry. If the solutions that can be found for fuel are ideal, they would also help us address the back end. Because I want to link back to what Sylvie was saying about engagement with the public. I think we need to be prepared for discussions of the type that we have not been seeing on nuclear before. Because in the local communities around large installations, very often you have receptive audience because it's an important local employer. With SMRs, this is not necessarily guaranteed to be the case. And that comes on top of the fact that the locations will be different. They will be closer to communities. So I think if we, and of course, the back end, handling of waste, decommissioning, handling of spent fuel is one of the drivers of public perception and public acceptance, for nuclear projects. So if we can have actually fuel solutions that also help us to address the back end, all the better.
Thank you. Now, over to Mr. Gorman. We have heard a lot about Canada and the deployment of SMRs and being very fast already today. But to your introductory remarks, is there still something that you would like to elaborate on?
Thank you, Petri. I will, and if I could, I'll just pick up on this and then make some very brief comments. On the again, using Canada as an example, you know, our 60 years of history in nuclear has been based on the CANDU technology, which uses unenriched uranium. And in fact, just at this wonderful exhibition on Monday, Atkins Realis, who is the caretaker for the intellectual property for CANDU, announced their next evolution in the CANDU technology called the Monarch, which is a 1 gigawatt natural uranium-driven machine. But of course, we have the requirements now for the first time in our nation for enriched uranium. And our position is quite interesting. You know, we're the second largest exporter of uranium in the world, thanks to Cameco, and Orano is a very major player in the market as well. We cannot foresee a pathway to enriching uranium any time in the short to medium term. And so the collaboration, the cooperation that we're talking about with European countries, whether it's France or others, and then the United States, and Katie mentioned Japan, it's absolutely essential that we figure that out, right? The last few things I will say about Canada while I'm here is just to mention that part of the credibility that we were speaking about earlier in the Canadian context has to do with these massive refurbishments we have underway. We are refurbishing 10 nuclear units. We're halfway through. It is on time and it's on budget. And that has been given us the license to be pursuing the other sorts of technologies that we're pursuing, and it's what has engendered the confidence within the federal government and the provincial government and other stakeholders. So that's absolutely essential. So we have that, and we have now announced that we're building out another 4,800 megawatts of large nuclear, mostly large, at the existing Bruce Power Plant site, which is already the world's largest operating nuclear plant. And when we think about specific regulatory licensing requirements, just a very tangible example of things that we can do to speed things up, we're looking at putting many of these new small modular reactors and the large new reactors on existing nuclear sites. And in the Canadian context, we're still struggling with, do we have to go through the entire process, even though this is a nuclear brownfield, or can we look at these already well understood sites and speed up the sort of regulatory and licensing approvals, not just for large nuclear, but for small modular reactors that are going onto those sites. And the very last thing I'll say, in case you're going to take my microphone away, Petra, for the rest of the conference here, is I would just like to highlight the importance of setting examples and co-opetition collaboration. You know, France's position here in Europe, driving, I think it's safe to say, the champion for including nuclear in the green taxonomy, if we call it that, for example, was so fundamentally important back in Canada when we were going through the same process of trying to get the taxonomy, in our case, the green bond framework approved, which we just did about 2 weeks ago. It's that sort of leadership by other nations or by other regulators that allows us to build off of each other. It was, you know, President Biden and his administration in the United States, of course, with the implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act, which caused Canada to raise its game. We have to continue to feed off of each other, and we have to realize that our leadership in our individual areas is what is going to give the license for each of our nations to go further in all of these areas that we need to address. So I hope we can continue to deliver on that.
Thank you very much. And now our very resilient audience, I would like to still see, are there questions that we have not asked that we need to ask? Any questions from the audience? Yep. Okay, there in the back, and please state your name.
Yes, I'm Gregor Waschinsky. I'm correspondent for Handelsblatt, Germany's Business Daily. And Peter, you mentioned that some European countries are obviously phasing out nuclear energy. And this is a question for Peter and Jan. Would you say, or do you see the possibility that new nuclear and the SMRs could bring those countries back into the fold, or the opportunities that are associated?
Thank you for a very interesting question. So, Mr. Klaas and then Mr. Panek.
I have the advantage not having to speak on behalf of any political party or conviction. I don't know. As I said, you will sometimes, you cannot convince people of something. Some people do not dare to fly, and they do not fly. Some people do not believe in vaccination against COVID, and they aren't vaccinated. So yeah, you will always have people saying we don't want nuclear, we don't believe in it, it's too dangerous. But I hope that rationality will come back at a certain moment. And again, as I said, if you look at the target is to decarbonize, is to become carbon neutral by 2050 or earlier. If we can do that with some technologies only, well, maybe it will happen, but I'm convinced we will need all three types of technologies to get there, and renewables will be one of them with conversion and storage linked to that. CCS, CCU might be used, but you will also need nuclear. Specifically in some countries, Central Europe, Western Europe are definitely those kind of countries where you cannot do everything with renewables, specifically not if you depend on wind or sun. That's going to be, well, I'm not saying impossible, but it's at least going to be extremely costly. So let's look at all technologies and let's be rational about it. That's my message.
Thank you. Mr. Panek, on the question.
Yeah, but I think the answer is known already. The Commission is not in the business of determining the energy mixes of member states. This is the decision of each member state whether they use nuclear or not. And the arrival of SMRs changes nothing in the task of the Commission, which is to respect the choice of individual member states and make sure that those who decide to use nuclear do so with full respect to the highest standards of safety that we have in Europe, and that they do so for the benefit of the European policies and European citizens and businesses. And I think what we are discussing here is in no way changing that fundamental principle and policy line.
Thank you. Did we have some more questions from the audience? Oh, there are many. Fantastic. Now, let's see. here in the front. And
yes, I am Jacques Roussel, experience in EDF design, conception and construction of the plants in France and abroad, in China and United Kingdom and so on. My question is relatively to the responsibility of government with these projects. I mean, globally, with international convention of nuclear safety, the governments are at the primary level responsible. So my question is it reasonable to have complete private operators? Is it compatible with this objective? That is my question.
can you to have completely? Can you repeat your question? Is it compatible to have
To have private operators?
private operators? Okay, to have private operators.
We can have private for the construction, for the support, but globally for the responsibility of operation on production of waste, and also for the safeguards with Euratom, on IEA, on the nuclear safety, on security, also security, you mean?
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Gorman?
I hope I've understood the question properly. I will just say that I always bring it back to Canada here. I hope that's my job on the panel. Is that all right? So in the Canadian context, we have the operator of the largest nuclear plant in the world, Bruce Power, is a private corporation, and they're the ones who have just announced they're going to be building another 4,800 megawatts of nuclear at that same plant. Ultimately, the property is owned, by Ontario Power Generation, which is a Crown utility, but the operator is a private corporation. So there's that crossover, and then I think I'd also mention when I spoke about the CANDO technology and the new Monarch, the evolution of CANDO, the new Monarch design, the IP is licensed to Atkins Realis as the steward for the intellectual property in this instance. Ultimately, it continues to be owned by the federal government. So my point being, there are ways to have the private sector deeply involved in both the technology and the operation of these assets, as long as you get those connections right.
Then Mr. Pegvede, and then Madam Commissioner.
Quickly, just to remark, there are dozens of private players operating nuclear plants in the world, of course. So it's just a question of having clear rules, regulators, and public service. If providing electricity is a public service, maybe the answer is yes. Does not need to be provided by a public entity. It can be provided by a private entity, but it has to fulfill a certain number of rules. And it has to be clear also what happens in case of a failure.
Thank you. Madam Commissioner, please.
Yes, I would say that even in France there is no requirement for private or public, and it's very clear in the environment code. I would say a licensee must have competencies, finance, and when I say competencies, that means technical and of course human resources, and finance, it is of course for operation, but as well for decommissioning and for the waste, spent fuel waste management. And so you see it's only some requirements, but it doesn't mean public or private, and I must say clearly that in France we have some private, some public, and it's not necessary, the best one and not necessarily the ones we think, to be very clear. And so now for SMR, the question is really about technical and competencies and financing. And so in France, we don't have the idea of vendor. Only licensee or future licensee can ask for an assessment. And so during the assessment, there is technical expertise, of course, but as well a look at the finance because they will be responsible after that. And this is very important.
Thank you very much. Was there a quick comment by Mr. Klaas?
Very briefly, and I'm not speaking about private or public. The most important thing, I think, is that you have competition. Competition is the key to companies trying to be cheaper than their competitors, and is the key to companies trying to be more innovative and more inclined to respond to consumers' needs than in the case of a monopoly, or whether it's private or public. So I think it's very important to have competition in also these sectors. I mean, think about pharmaceuticals. Think about the speed at which we developed vaccines against COVID 2 years ago. I don't think you could have done that in a non-competitive environment. So that is, I think, key, that you have competition.
Yes, please, Dr. Huff.
So short. So the United States has the largest reactor fleet in the world. It's been operating since the 50s and 60s. It is entirely private operators. It's going fine. We have the highest capacity factors, now than we've ever had. 92, 93% capacity factors, extremely high performing, safe, etc. It relies on the regulator.
Thank you very much. Now we are actually moving towards the conclusion of our panel, and I'd like to take now a quick round through all the distinguished panelists here, and now the responses will be brief elevator speeches. And the question actually come originally from Dr. Huff, to ask ourselves basically that what can we do individually or as part of our professional role, basically, to help realize the deployment of SMRs and AMRs. What can, thinking about in our own roles, what is it we can do to drive the development? Start with Mr. Panek, please, and then we take a round.
Yes, well, the proof of the pudding is in eating it. So what we need to do is to get the first projects off the ground and make sure that indeed they are followed by a full series of deployment, and that it's done as early as possible, because the decarbonization objective is not going to wait for us.
I would say that as regulators, we have to evolve because we have newcomers, and so we have to change our way of working to be, I would say, close to the way of engagement, development phase, and so on.
I think we have to keep our eyes fully on target. Each individual here has the opportunity to focus really hard on our climate ambitions and the successful deployment of these reactors, and not be distracted by the potential for excess profit or the potential for, a nation's world domination or whatever drives people to do things that are not in the interest of working together towards deployment.
Yeah, well, so in my field of venture capital, investing in startups in that very specific field, I first happy to see that the choice we made gathering experts, nuclear experts from different fields was the good choice, because it's a very specific industry, clearly, and that will help Hexagon, our fund, to become a specialized fund that will bring credibility to the projects we will select.
Thank you. I come back to that notion of readiness. I think what is very important is that society and industry realizes that if we want to drastically reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, that there are a certain number of alternatives. We don't have the luxury to exclude any of them today, and nuclear is one of them. And I think society must evolve into that direction, and of course safety and etc. should be safeguarded. That is clear. That goes for all human activities, I think. Readiness.
You? Evans?
I would say of paramount importance is the involvement of all stakeholders to develop the early roadmap for deployment of technologies and related fuel cycle. We need to involve vendors, operators, suppliers, safety authorities, financing markets, investors, and governments.
What Katie said, I think we have to recognize that this incredible nuclear sector, which is has this network of this entrenched network in history is the platform on which a large part of the solution for climate change and energy security is going to be premised, and we need to take that amazing international network and deliver together for a much larger goal than our own international or even national interests.
And actually, thank you, and I intend to respond to this last question myself also. As a nuclear generator here in Europe, I mean, I need to lead so that we operate safely our current fleet every single day and night. The future builds upon safety today. Then also need to lead so that nuclear is a business that makes sense for our company. Because if that is not the case, why on earth build for the future? And then let's say in the new build feasibility study we are running and exploring the possibilities, we really need to work with a kind of open mind and in close connection also with our important stakeholders, the customers and the safety authorities. So now I'd actually like to conclude this panel and thank all of our panelists for extremely active and insightful participation. Was there still? Okay. We are improvising a little bit, please. One question and snappy answers, and then we conclude for real.
Hello. Thank you. My name is Victor Contreras. I am an electronic engineer. And I was working for 5 years with many suppliers around the world for Framatome. And just two points, I need one answer. The first point is, what is the policy, the official policy to drive to management the source? Where can I obtain the source? Yes, this is the first point. And the second point, how can what is the policy to management the waste?
The policy to
management the waste to management.
Waste, okay.
Waste management.
Yeah, thank you. Now maybe a snappy comment on the waste management. Anybody feeling like it? Dr. Huff.
We're working on it. In the United States, it's slow. It will take patience. It's safe where it is, but advanced reactors will need new regulatory assessment with regard to packaging for intermediate storage and eventual disposal, but it's technically solved, politically a challenge in the US. We're following Canada and Finland and other nations in their consent-based approach to finding locations.
Thank you very much. And now, for real, we are concluding and thanking our excellent panelists, thanking our absolutely excellent audience. What to applaud for you. Thank you.